Now, one thing that Lincoln and the radical Republicans could agree on is that going into Reconstruction, there needed to be a plan for what was going to happen with African Americans in the South. Now that slavery was illegal, we know that we don't know. We can imagine that the transition from institution of slavery where you are told what to do every minute of your life. You don't support yourself financially. You don't support your family financially. You have only ever done really one job. Is it likely that you're going to be able to just, like most slaves can't even read and write. So they are at a incredible disadvantage in terms of society and what it takes to actually support yourself and create a family and create a positive environment for yourself and your children. So we need something to help all these African Americans in the South. So what Lincoln does with the radical Republicans is they create a government group designed specifically to do this, to help these people. So it's technically called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, but we just basically call it the Freedmen's Bureau. So the Freedmen's Bureau was actually created just a few weeks before Lincoln was assassinated, so he did have a hand in creating this, and they were meant to provide food, clothing, healthcare, education for both black and white refugees in the South. There were a lot of really, really poor people in the South from more rural places where their homes and their whole towns and everything were just totally destroyed by the war. So they didn't have the tools to really move on and keep going and pick up sort of from where they left off before the war either. So the Freedmen's Bureau was meant to help them as well. They reunited families that had been separated by slavery. They reunited families that had been separated by war. They negotiated labor contracts between freedmen and white landowners. So if you own a plantation and you just lost all your slaves, the Freedmen's Bureau would help you and help the slaves to sort of write out a contract for your slaves if any of them wanted to begin working for you for pay. They also represented African Americans in court, which helped establish the idea that black people could have legal rights and could be in court and represent themselves in court or be represented in court. So helps to sort of get them some actual legal representation, which is an excellent tool. The Freedmen's Bureau does a lot of really incredible work. Ultimately, they were disbanded in 1872 once Reconstruction is really starting to die down. And one thing that we're going to talk about a lot is, was Reconstruction successful? Would we consider Reconstruction to be a successful thing? I actually have the personal belief that obviously it's no secret that the North and South are very different today. I believe that the Reconstruction is the reason for that, not the Civil War. I believe that what goes on during Reconstruction is much more of a contributing factor as to the differences and even the somewhat tension that is still there between the North and the South today. And of all of the things that we could say don't work about Reconstruction, and there are going to be a lot, the Freedmen's Bureau is one of the few things that does work, and this is an incredible group that does a lot of good. So obviously after Lincoln is assassinated in April of 1965, we're going to have a new president, and it is Andrew Johnson. If you remember, he was a pro-union Democrat from Tennessee. So now we have a Southerner in the White House and a Democrat. So this is definitely nothing that the government was ever expecting, and this is not anything that the Republicans, especially the radical Republicans, were not looking forward to. Now, he might be a Southerner and he might be a Democrat, but he was pro-union and he was not at all happy about secession. So he did not want to be nearly as lenient as Lincoln did, but he is a Democrat and he is a Southerner, so he doesn't want to be nearly as severe and as harsh as the radical Republicans did. So he's sort of that middle between area. So like Lincoln, though, he did want restoring the Union to be fast. He started offering pardons and restoration of land to any Confederate that took oath to help sort of begin removing the begin the process. Except every Confederate leader had to write special permission to him to ask for a pardon. He wouldn't just like give out pardons. He would, if you were Riley, for example, or Jefferson Davis, you had to specifically write to Andrew Johnson and ask him for a pardon, explain why you thought you should be pardoned. He held on to the requirement that each state had to ratify the 13th Amendment and then write into their state constitution that they had to abolish slavery. He also, like I said, had those Confederate leaders write to him and ask him for a pardon. Now, Johnson really pushed for the abolishment of slavery, but like most Southerners, he was a white Democrat and believed that the white population was more important and better than the black population. So he believed in a government for white men, not white women, not black men, not black women, just white men, basically, which is the government that we had at this point for the last 100 years. So he has very little sympathy for the struggles of former slaves. He doesn't really want them to have the right to vote, so he's really not going to be helpful in getting the 14th or 15th Amendments passed. He's also a supporter of states' rights. So the idea that Southern states could just come back into the Union is something that he supported, but he didn't want government to be a big one. This is an idea that he wanted to allow Southern states to be able to limit the federal government's power. So by the time Congress comes back to session in 1865 in December, now remember, Congress isn't in D.C. all the time. If you go to Congress, you only go to Congress for sessions. There are different sessions, sort of like school. You're not in school 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You go to school certain days out of the week, and then you go certain months out of the year. You don't go in the summer. And sort of like that. There are different breaks for Congress. So while Congress is not in session, the president, it almost seems like, has more power because there's no one around to really see exactly what he's doing, especially back then when you can't just flip on the news and like hear what Johnson's been up to lately. They're not around, so they're not really seeing it. So by the time Congress goes back in session, most Southern states had met Johnson's requirement, and a lot of them had been readmitted to the Union. So that means when Congress comes back in session, a lot of Democratic Southerners are coming back to Congress. Now, this made a lot of radical Republicans very unhappy because most states had done nothing to ensure the rights of and the protection of African Americans. So they felt very negatively about that. So as we go into Reconstruction, a major piece of this, and we'll get more into it tomorrow, but a really major piece of this is going to be the relationship between Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans. And I'll tell you right now, it is not going to be a good one.